The dining room smelled of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes. The familiar warmth of Margaret's Naperville home doing little to soothe the tension in the air. Claire, my daughter, sat at the head of the table beside her grandmother, her eyes bright with excitement as she began talking about the money Margaret had so generously received every month. "I don't know how Mom does it," Claire said, smiling at Margaret. $4,000 every month. She's incredible." I blinked, caught off guard. My fork hovered over my plate, my mind racing. $4,000. That was the exact amount I had been sending every month. Yet Claire and Margaret seemed convinced it was entirely Margaret's doing. My contribution, quietly made, was invisible, erased from the conversation, dismissed, and now misattributed. Margaret's eyes sparkled with pride as she nodded, allowing Claire to continue without correction. "Yes, it keeps us comfortable," she said. Glancing briefly at me, her expression held nothing but satisfaction, a silent confirmation that I was, once again, overlooked. I felt my chest tighten. Every dinner, every conversation seemed to confirm the same pattern I had lived with for years, my efforts unnoticed, my sacrifices ignored, my intentions twisted. A wave of disbelief and hurt washed over me. I wanted to speak, to correct the misunderstanding, to tell them the truth, but the words caught in my throat. Saying anything felt like disrupting the carefully constructed narrative they preferred. I watched as Claire beamed, entirely convinced she was celebrating Margaret's generosity, and I felt the sting of invisibility more acutely than ever, the quiet ache of being blamed for not doing enough, when I had been doing so much, settled deep in my chest. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of polite conversation and unspoken tension, each bite tasting heavier than the last, each smile masking the exhaustion of yet another fight I hadn't chosen to enter. Why does my daughter believe her grandmother over me? How long will I let this continue as the dinner faded from memory? I found myself drifting back through the years, tracing the long line of moments when my efforts had been overlooked. My childhood had been a careful study in comparison. No matter what I accomplished, someone else, always more charismatic, more obedient, more perfect, was celebrated. Margaret's influence had been subtle at first. A compliment here, a gentle nudge toward Claire there. But over time, it became the invisible framework shaping our household. I remembered school events where my grades were quietly noted while others were praised loudly. Talent shows where I gave everything I had. Yet the applause always seemed to belong to someone else. Even simple acts of kindness were minimized, dismissed with a nod and a comment about how much brighter another's contributions shone. Margaret had always favored compliance and admiration over quiet competence. I had learned to anticipate her expectations, to measure my words and actions carefully, yet it never seemed enough. My accomplishments, large or small, faded into the background, while every small success of Claire or another family member was heralded, dissected, and celebrated. I grew accustomed to the sting of invisibility, the weight of being good but never enough. The pattern repeated as I grew older. College applications, early career choices, even mundane household responsibilities, my efforts were noted only in contrast to others. A silent benchmark by which I was always found wanting. Margaret's opinions, once mild, had hardened into a kind of authority that extended even to Claire, shaping how she judged the world and, inadvertently, how she judged me. I realized the roots of tonight's dinner, the sharp edge of Claire's words and Margaret's approval, stretched back decades. My feelings of invisibility, of being blamed for not doing enough despite all I had done, were not new. They were shadows of a long history, etched into the fabric of my family life. Have family expectations always been stacked against me? Can I ever be seen for who I truly am? For years, I had quietly carried a burden that no one seemed to notice. Every month, without fanfare or acknowledgement, I transferred $4,000 to Margaret's account, money meant to keep the household running smoothly, to cover bills and occasional indulgences for Claire. It was a significant portion of my modest retirement, and I made it work by cutting back on nearly everything else. I took extra shifts at the hospital part-time, picking up weekend hours whenever I could. Some mornings, I skipped breakfast to save money. And many evenings, I settled for simple meals at home instead of going out. I reminded myself that it was worth it, that supporting my family even in the shadow of their disregard was my responsibility. But the constant balancing act was exhausting. A tightrope walked between financial necessity and emotional strain. The irony was never lost on me. While I was quietly keeping the household afloat, everyone else assumed Margaret was the generous one, the one making things happen, the praise, the admiration, the gratitude all directed elsewhere. Claire's excitement at dinner, the way she attributed the money to her grandmother, cut deeper than any words of criticism I had endured in my life. I was invisible, my labor unnoticed, my care unacknowledged. Sometimes I questioned whether it was worth it. I thought about the sacrifices I had made, the sleep lost, the energy spent, the money withdrawn from savings I had hoped to use for myself in retirement. It was frustrating, maddening even, to see my contributions dismissed or assumed to be someone else's. And yet, I kept going. I kept sending the money because I believed in my family, because I had made a promise to support them, and because I hoped one day they would see the truth. But tonight, after Claire's words and Margaret's proud nods, I could feel the weight pressing harder than ever. My efforts, my secret sacrifices, had not only gone unrecognized, they had been credited to someone else entirely. The frustration and exhaustion coiled tightly within me, a silent fury that I had buried for decades. If no one sees my sacrifices, does it even matter? Can I continue without being acknowledged? The next dinner arrived with the same pretense of normalcy, but I felt the tension coiling tighter in my chest than ever before. Claire, perched beside Margaret, began recounting the latest bills Margaret had paid, her voice bright and animated. Mom really outdid herself this month. Claire said, $4,000. Can you believe it? She's incredible. I froze mid-bite, my heart sinking. $4,000 my money, quietly sent, had been claimed by Margaret as her own. The room seemed to close around me, the familiar warmth of the dining room turning into a cage. I wanted to speak, to correct her, to say it was my contribution, but the words lodged stubbornly in my throat. Margaret's eyes sparkled with satisfaction, her approving nod giving Claire the courage to continue. It's because Mom is so responsible, Claire added, glancing at me as if I were a shadow in the background. The unspoken message was clear. I was being publicly dismissed, my effort erased from the narrative entirely. I felt my cheeks tighten with a mixture of humiliation and disbelief. The silence of the rest of the family, the way they leaned into Margaret's praise, made me feel invisible. Every argument I had ever refrained from, every compromise I had silently endured, came rushing back, mingling with the sharp sting of this new betrayal. The words I had been holding in for months, the desire to claim my voice and my contribution, wavered on the edge of release. Yet I restrained myself, knowing that any confrontation might ignite anger, distrust, or even resentment. Still, the ache of invisibility was profound, each minute stretching longer than the last. The meal continued in this strained rhythm, Claire smiling as if the praise she was offering was her rightful duty, and I sat silently, absorbing the unfairness, the miscredit, and the misunderstanding. Should I finally speak up? Even if it means facing family anger, how much longer can I stay silent? The hum of conversation and the rich aroma of coffee filled the downtown Chicago cafe as I sat across from Jessica Parker. I had always trusted her judgment, and now, more than ever, I needed guidance. I told her everything: the dinner, Claire's public praise of Margaret, the misattributed money, and the years of silent sacrifice that seemed to have vanished into thin air. Jessica listened carefully, nodding, her eyes steady and thoughtful. "Evelyn," she said finally, "you've been giving too much and getting too little in return. It's not just about the money, it's about respect. You've been invisible for too long. You have a right to set boundaries." Her words felt like a lifeline. I realized that I had spent decades accommodating everyone else, shaping my life around their perceptions and needs, and in the process, erasing my own contributions. Jessica encouraged me to reclaim control not angrily or vindictively, but firmly, with clarity about what I would accept and what I would no longer tolerate. We spoke about practical steps clarifying my financial contributions, deciding when and how to communicate boundaries, and preparing for inevitable pushback. Her advice reminded me that being considerate didn't mean being submissive, and that asserting myself was not betrayal, it was necessary for my own well-being. By the time I left the cafe, a sense of determination had replaced the lingering heaviness in my chest. I felt steadier, as though a path had opened before me, one where I could finally act with intention, rather than constantly reacting to others' expectations. The next step would be difficult, but I knew I could not remain passive any longer. The decision I had been avoiding for so long was now unavoidable, and I would need every ounce of courage I could muster. Am I ready to challenge my family's unfair expectations? What will happen if I take control? The decision had been simmering in my mind for weeks, but that morning I finalized it. I logged into my bank account and redirected the automatic transfer. No more $4,000 would leave my savings this month. The weight of the choice pressed on me, but beneath it, a strange sense of clarity began to emerge. For the first time in years, I was taking control of my own contributions. Within hours, my phone began to ring. Margaret's voice was sharp and accusatory the moment I answered. "Evelyn, what is this? Why hasn't the money arrived? How could you do this to us?" Her tone was less about need and more about outrage, as though my decision alone had upended their world. Claire, too, joined in, her words teetering between shock and indignation. "Mom worked so hard to manage everything, and now you're taking it away. Don't you care about us at all?" The manipulation was clear. They wanted guilt to replace reason. My chest tightened, and for a moment, the old reflex to apologize, to placate, rose instinctively. But I forced myself to breathe and respond with measured calm. "I've contributed for years, quietly and consistently. This month, I need to focus on my own finances and well-being. We will discuss future contributions when the time is right." I could hear their frustration, their disbelief, but I held firm. The conversation left me emotionally drained, yet quietly exhilarated. For the first time, my voice had carried the weight of my intentions rather than being drowned out by expectation or misattribution. Even as guilt and anxiety laced my thoughts, worrying about Claire's disappointment and Margaret's anger, I recognized a new feeling beneath it: empowerment. As the day wore on, the tension lingered. I knew this action would ripple through family dynamics, forcing reactions I could not predict. My control over my own life had begun, but the consequences were just starting to surface. Can I withstand the backlash and stay true to myself? Will they understand or escalate further? It took only a few days for the pieces to start falling into place. A conversation with a neighbor, combined with an accidental glance at some recent bills, revealed what I had suspected but feared to confirm. Margaret had exaggerated her financial needs. The household was far from struggling, and Claire had been misinformed, repeating stories of hardship she believed to be true. Anger rose first, sharp and unrelenting. All those months of stress, of cutting corners and stretching my retirement, had been based on a false narrative. I had sacrificed sleep, meals, and personal comfort under the assumption that my family truly needed my support. And now I realized it had been for appearances, for pride. Relief followed swiftly, like a cool wind after a long, stifling summer. The burden of responsibility that had weighed so heavily on my shoulders was not mine alone to carry. I had done what I believed was right, and my intentions had been consistent and honorable. That validation, quiet and internal, steadied me more than any apology could have. At the same time, the discovery sparked another emotion: clarity. The conflict that had haunted me for years was not rooted in my failures or inadequacies, but in the family's pride and rigid hierarchy. My contributions had been invisible not because they were insufficient, but because Margaret wanted recognition for herself, and Claire had been conditioned to echo her mother's perspective without question. I sat for a long moment, absorbing the magnitude of what I had learned. My anger and relief swirled together, leaving me with a clear sense of purpose. I could no longer let my family dictate the terms of my self-worth or my sacrifices. It was time to confront the situation, not with anger, but with intention and firmness. The next step would require courage and precision, and I knew the outcome could change the dynamics of our family forever. How could I have been misled for so long? Will confronting them repair or ruin relationships? I arrived at Margaret's house feeling a mix of determination and apprehension. The decision to confront them had been simmering for days, but the weight of it now pressed against my chest like a heavy coat. Claire and Margaret were in the living room, the familiar air of authority and expectation surrounding them. But this time, I was ready to break through. "I need to speak clearly," I began, my voice steady despite the tension tightening my shoulders. "The money I've been sending every month is my contribution, not your doing. Margaret, it has always been my choice to support the household, and it will continue on my terms." Margaret's eyes narrowed, and Claire shifted uncomfortably beside her. But I pressed on. "I will no longer allow my efforts to be misrepresented or my intentions ignored. I expect respect for the choices I make, just as I have respected yours all these years." The room was quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that stretches thin and thick at the same time. Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if weighing whether to maintain her control or step back. Claire's fingers fidgeted nervously in her lap, the admiration and doubt clashing in her expression. "I am not being unreasonable," I continued. "I am asking for honesty, acknowledgement, and the space to make my own decisions without manipulation or guilt. If that is not possible, I will have to reconsider my involvement in financial matters entirely." The words hung in the air, sharp but necessary. For the first time, I felt the power of clarity, the strength that comes from standing firm, knowing that I was no longer allowing pride or tradition to dictate my self-worth. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my agency, and the tension in the room reflected the gravity of that action. As I left the living room, a sense of relief and empowerment washed over me, tempered by the knowledge that the real consequences were only beginning to unfold. I had spoken my truth, but the reactions to it would shape the next chapter of our lives. Will setting these boundaries finally earn their respect? Or will I face further resentment? The weeks that followed the confrontation brought a sense of calm and clarity I had never known. I redirected my focus to my own life, carefully managing my finances and reclaiming time I had long devoted to appeasing the family. With the money I had previously sent, I began investing in myself, small courses, personal projects, and maintaining a comfortable lifestyle that reflected my own priorities rather than fulfilling others' expectations. I also devoted more time to mentoring younger colleagues and volunteering at the local community center. Sharing my experiences, offering guidance, and seeing the tangible results of my efforts gave me a profound sense of accomplishment. For the first time in decades, I felt visible and valuable not as a mother, a daughter, or a caregiver, but as Evelyn, the person I had always been beneath the weight of family obligations. Margaret and Claire began to notice the shift. Margaret's gaze held a mixture of surprise and cautious respect whenever I entered the room. Claire, once so quick to echo her grandmother's judgments, now looked at me with hesitation, as if unsure how to respond to my newfound assertiveness. I maintained my composure, refusing to gloat or seek acknowledgement. My confidence was quiet but unmistakable. Even with the subtle tension that lingered, I relished the freedom that came with independence. I made plans without consulting anyone, celebrated small victories on my own terms, and allowed myself to feel proud of my choices. The house that once felt oppressive now seemed distant. Its hold over me diminished with each deliberate step I took toward autonomy. The reactions from Margaret and Claire were almost secondary to the satisfaction of living authentically. I had proven, first to myself, that I could thrive without approval or validation from those who had long misunderstood me. The path to personal triumph was not without friction, but it was undeniably mine, shaped by courage, patience, and the refusal to let past injustices define my present. Can true independence bring lasting peace, or will family conflict resurface? Sitting in the quiet of my condo, I let myself reflect on the path that had brought me here. The tension, the frustration, the long years of being overlooked, all of it had shaped me, but none of it defined me. I had learned that empowerment came not from approval or praise, but from knowing my own worth and acting with intention. I thought of Claire, her admiration tempered by newfound respect. The daughter I had once felt invisible to now regarded me differently, no longer echoing Margaret's authority without question. Our relationship had begun to shift, small but meaningful changes that gave me hope. I recognized that the lessons I had learned, the boundaries I had set, were not only for my own peace but also to model strength and self-respect for her. There was an optimism I had not felt in years, a sense that the future could be shaped by choices I controlled. I made plans for myself without hesitation: more time with friends, community work, travel, and simple joys that had been deferred while accommodating the family's expectations. I embraced each day with deliberate intention, finding pride and satisfaction in the autonomy I had claimed. I realized that standing up for myself had preserved my dignity in ways that no apology or acknowledgement from others could. It had set a standard not of confrontation or resentment, but of self-respect and perseverance. The journey had been long, sometimes painful, but the lessons endured honesty with oneself, courage in the face of manipulation, and the clarity that personal integrity outweighs familial pressure. As I closed my journal and looked toward the horizon beyond the city skyline, I felt a sense of quiet triumph. The path ahead was open, and I could walk it freely, confident in my choices and in the example I would leave for Claire. If I could relive these years, would I act the same way? How do we measure the value of family when trust is tested?